You're welcome to start, Councillor Murray. Councillor Murray, Emily Horn, Committee Officer speaking here. You're muted. If you'd like to start again, please. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Apologies for that. Welcome to the Planning Committee meeting on the 23rd of March 2021. I'm Councillor Jim Murray, Chair of this committee, and this is our 8th meeting to be held remotely in accordance with the published government guidelines. For those participating in the meeting or watching on the live stream, please bear with us if we have any technical difficulties, such as leaving our cameras and speakers on mute. I will now take the agenda items 1 to 3 together: introductions, attendance and substitutes, and declarations of interest. Can I now ask my fellow committee members to introduce themselves to the listeners via a roll call? This is to be done in alphabetical order in accordance with the published agenda, and I will ask that each confirms their full name, if they are acting as a substitute, and whether they wish to make a declaration of interest of any of the items on the agenda. So before I do so, I confirm that we have had apologies from Councillor Jane Lamb, who is substituted by Councillor Paul Metcalfe. So, Councillor Diplock.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. Councillor Peter Diplock from Old Town. I have no interest to declare in the agenda this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Maxted.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everybody. My name is Councillor Robin Maxted, Upperton Ward, and I have no interests to declare.
Thank you. Councillor Metcalfe.
Good evening. It's Councillor Paul Metcalfe, and I am substituting for Councillor Lamb, and I have no disposable interest to declare.
Thank you. Councillor Mia.
Good evening to you. I'm Councillor Mia of Langley Ward, and I have no interest to declare. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Murdoch.
Good evening, everybody. Councillor Colin Murdoch, Ratton Ward, and I have no interest to declare this evening.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. My name is Councillor Barry Taylor in Meads, and I have no interest to declare.
Thank you. Councillor Vaughan.
Good evening, Councillor Candy Vaughan of Langley Ward, and I have no interests to declare.
Thank you. Also joining us are the officers, Mr. Lee Palmer, Head of Planning First, Neil Collins, Specialist Advisor for Planning, and Mrs. Helen Monaghan, Planning Lawyer, who are in attendance to present the reports and respond to any questions from members. Democratic Services Officer Emily Horn is also in attendance, and other Democratic Service officers are assisting in the background of this meeting. Please can I ask all participants to ensure that their microphones have been muted when not speaking, and if you have connectivity issues, you may find it help. Sorry, I lost my space there. So the microphones have been muted. If you're not going to, you may find it help if you turn off your camera when not speaking. All participants are reminded to not take calls on their mobile phones during the course of the meeting. I will now take agenda item number 4, the minutes. I'm going to assume that everything's okay unless somebody says something. So are we happy to approve the minutes from the last meeting? Thank you. So the minutes for the last meeting have been approved. Any other, I believe there's no items of any urgent matters. So we'll move on to advice now. To ensure that all parties are clear as to the Council's constitution, the committee is not in a position to accept any new additional documentation sent to us electronically today, although previously submitted documents will be referred to as part of the officer's presentation where appropriate. We now come to the planning applications. For those unfamiliar with the procedure of planning applications, first there is a presentation by the planning officers. Then we would normally hear public speakers. However, live public speaking has temporarily been suspended during remote meetings. Instead, public speakers have been invited to send in speeches which will be read out by an officer. Any received will be heard in this order. Up to 1 speech from objectors, a maximum of 3 minutes. Up to 1 speech from supporters, a maximum of 3 minutes. And a speech from a ward member, ward councillor, a maximum of 3 minutes. The committee is then invited to discuss the application, and I will ask members to raise their hands if they wish to speak. Can all councillors, officers, participants please clearly state their name each time they speak so that it's clear to members of the public who is listening. Sorry, who is speaking. Once all of the committee members who wish to speak on the application have done so, I will ask if there is a proposer and a seconder for the officer's recommendation. If so, we will move to the vote. If the officer's recommendation is lost, I will ask for an alternative proposal. I will ask the proposer to state the planning reasons for the proposal and ask whether we have a seconder. If necessary, I will seek officer advice on the reasons given and provide the proposer the chance to respond to confirm their proposal. If this is seconded, we will then vote on that particular item. To vote, I will call the name of each committee member present in the alphabetical order. Please clearly state whether you are for, against, or abstaining from the vote. And members must not leave the room during the live meeting. It is essential that members are present for the entire presentation and discussion of the application to be able to vote on that item. If a member very briefly loses their internet connection, this may not disqualify them from voting on the item provided. They may seek clarification as to anything they may have missed as soon as possible after they have reconnected. So if you get disconnected for a few seconds, that won't be a problem. We will just recap. If you get disconnected for any length of time, then I'll stop the meeting for a minute or two to sort of try and get you back online. If it looks as though we can't get you back online, then we will move on and you won't be able to vote if you miss out on too much of the discussion. Agenda item 6. Councillor Murray to introduce the item. Agenda item 6, application number 200855. Proposal, outline application with all matters reserved for siting of 18 residential units at Ocklinge Chalk Pit. I believe Mr. Collins, you'll be talking on this one.
Thank you, Chair. The presentation should be on the screen now. It's Neil Collins speaking, Senior Specialist Advisor within Planning. So as the Chair said, this is for the Ocklinge Chalk Pit, application number 200855. Members will recall this application being considered at the previous committee meeting in February. It was resolved at that meeting to defer the application for 2 reasons. The first was in order for a site visit to be made, in order for the points of discussion to be considered on the site. That site visit has taken place on Saturday, the 6th of March, which is we had good weather, so that was with us, and that the members were able to look around the entirety of the site successfully. The other reason for deferral of the application was to have sight of a consultation response from the county ecologist, which arrived with the council officers just very shortly before the previous February committee meeting. So wasn't able to disseminate that at that time, but that has now been carried out, and members will see and will be aware that of the county ecologist's response, and that there's no principal objection on ecology grounds. So I'll just very briefly run you through to recap everything for the application. The application is for outline planning permission with all matters reserved. The proposal is for the siting of 18 dwellings. So all matters, including those covered by any of the submitted information, would be reserved for consideration at a later date. For clarity, it is recommended by officers that those reserved matters would come back to the committee when they're submitted. So for transparency, for all those involved and concerned about the application, those issues would be considered within a public meeting in the future. So there are 2 primary considerations for the site, and that they are ecology and arboriculture. As you can see on the screen here, the site is accessed from Willingdon Road via a private road, Coppice Court, and the site is a large bowl shaped topography because of its former chalk pit use. And so it has a number of trees on the site and also accommodates some wildlife as well. So those two primary considerations form the basis for the consideration of the principle of the siting of 18 dwellings. So some information has been submitted with the application. Members have had sight of all that information now. It includes information to address those two key considerations of ecology and arboriculture. On the ecology side, there was a preliminary ecological assessment submitted, and that detailed a stage 1 habitat survey. And that survey identified the presence of some species on the site and the potential presence of others. And so it also recommends further investigation into those issues to ensure that a full survey is undertaken to identify any further species on that site. As I mentioned before, the county ecologist was consulted with regard to the application. We have received the response. There is no principal objection to development based subject to further consideration of ecology issues. So the reserve matters that would come in would detail other investigation into ecology issues, including any mitigation measures that might be required to mitigate on the impact on the existing species, to relocate those species if required, and to improve the habitats on site and the biodiversity in terms of providing net gain for biodiversity. That issue is considered to be acceptable based upon that response. In terms of arboriculture, the council's tree specialist, arboricultural specialist, has been consulted. The response does raise some concern about the potential for significant loss of trees, although the information that has been submitted identifies that the likely loss would not be significant to prejudice the woodland order that exists on the site. So those are the two main considerations. All other considerations would be for reserve matters, along with those others, those two that I've mentioned. The reserve matters are outlined within the officer report. There's no change to the recommendation from that, which was put forward at the February committee meeting. Officers consider that this site is suitable in principle for housing for the quantum of development that is outlined, and obviously subject to all those reserve matters. So the recommendation from officers is for approval, and that is subject to a legal agreement. The legal agreement would secure affordable housing at a rate of 40%, and the local labour agreement as well. There is one further addition to the heads of terms to any legal agreement beyond that which was outlined at the previous meeting, and that's as a result of a response from East Sussex County Council Highways, which I can inform members about, and that has been received and recommends a contribution to improve public transport measures within the vicinity of the site. This particular site is in a location where public transport is not as good as it could be, and it is those contributions that would help to improve the access to public transport for future occupants of the site. So The other recommendation is for the reserve matters, and as I mentioned, they are extensive, both in terms of the primary considerations, principal considerations, and the more detailed considerations for the site as well. I won't run through all of those, but they are in the officer report for members to look at. And so I'll hand it back over to you now. I don't think there's anything else to go through on this, but I'll be happy to take any questions as they may arise.
Thank you. So all the members have been out for a site visit. We're looking at outline planning permission only. All matters are reserved. We've highlighted the three concerns that we had, which was the highways, the ecology and the agriculture report. Again, all of those matters are reserved as well. So that all of those reports will have to be done again before full planning consent is given. All that we're looking at for today is outline planning permission. Is the site big enough for 18 houses? Who would like to start speaking? Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can I say I'm pleased that we went for a site visit, and in actual fact, on the day, it was quite a pleasant day. Sun was shining, and the site was probably in its prime, and the only time it will ever be as pretty as it was. My problem is that yes, we're only considering today whether we think that it's suitable for housing to change from a chalk pit for people to live in. And I think the trouble is, what you're missing out is the environment itself. In my view, I still feel that during the winter time, it will be oppressive, no sun, and yet during the summertime, the leaves will be out on the trees. It will be nothing like the site visit that we saw. And it really does concern me that we are tonight considering people to live there in a very oppressive place, in a chalk pit the way it is. And in actual fact, it's probably ideal for industrial in some way, but to put people living in 18 houses down there, well, I certainly wouldn't live down there, and quite frankly, I don't think any member of this committee would consider living down there. So it really does concern me that we tonight are deciding whether it should be for people to live. And I'm not convinced, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to bring in Mr. Collins.
Thank you. Neil Collins speaking. I just want to respond to the point about the potential for daylight issues throughout the seasons, because obviously that situation would change, as has been mentioned, through the changing of leaved trees, that kind of thing. One of the reserve matters is for daylight, sunlight information, and of course, no sighting of the dwellings has been submitted. So obviously, we've had some indicative layout submitted. They only suggest the potential layout. It would be for detailed consideration of any proposed siting, and that coupled with any potential loss of trees. But the daylight, sunlight information that would be sought through reserve matters would identify the level of light that would serve those dwellings. So if there are concerns about daylight issues given the topography of the site, those things would be considered in detail from consultants that deal with daylight issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. Councillor Metcalfe.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Paul Metcalfe. I'd just like to say thank you very much to Lee Palmer and to Neil Collins for arranging the site visit. It certainly was a very interesting visit for myself, having not been there for about 50 years and having a chance to look around again. But I'm afraid what I saw has not changed any opinion that I put forward at our last meeting. I just do not feel that that site is suitable for residential accommodation in any shape or form, whether it be houses or whether it be flats. As I totally agree with Councillor Taylor, asking people to live down in a chalk pit, I just do not think it is at all suitable. Going back to what Councillor Taylor said, it would be ideal as an industrial or a commercial site, but certainly not as a residential one. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Maxted.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Robin Maxted. I echo Councillor Metcalf's thanks that he extended to Lee Palmer and Neil Collins for arranging the site visit, and a very comprehensive one it was as well. We were able to discuss the matter in quite a lot of depth. I mean, it obviously is an ex-chalk pit, but it hardly deserves, I think, the title of pit or down there. I mean, I was pleasantly surprised that it wasn't actually that deep. As Mr. Collins has said, the existing trees that are there that may be lost, which actually will reduce any leaf and tree cover that other councillors were worried about. These were not substantial trees. I mean, the majority of them were covered in ivy. You know, 50% of them were choked with ivy. The site itself actually rose up from the entrance. It actually was elevated. I don't know by how much, probably 10 feet. And I don't regard it as being well, I mean, obviously it is a pit, but it in another sense of the word, there's no way that can be described as a pit. I thought it was ideal for development, and it would be ideal for housing, and I certainly wouldn't have a problem living in that area. The road access was absolutely fine. There's a separate filter for right turning traffic on the way out of Eastbourne, and obviously there's no problems with the existing nursing homes. So I certainly don't have any problems with it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Murdoch.
Thank you, Chair. A question for Neil Collins, please. And I'll say thank you for the planning committee for the planning to take us around the site that day. It was comprehensive. But for Neil, could you please tell me, if you know, what the depth is from street level, i.e. the main road, not up the ramp, the main road where the steep sides are, to the base of the pit are? How deep that actually is? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Collins.
Thank you. If I understand the question correctly, it depends. It is a varying height along Willingdon Road. It'd be easier if I share the screen again. So Willingdon Road runs along the southern part of the site. Obviously there is, and you members will have seen from the site visit as well, that there is a difference in land levels around the perimeter of the site. And along this, if I understand it correctly, then it rises here to its greatest point, which I understand to be approximately in the region of about 21 to 25 metres. So that's to the base of the lowest part of the base of the site, but that reduces gradually as we go along this southern curtilage of the site. And that I should also add that is the steepest or tallest part of the site in relation to the base.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Murdoch, if you've finished.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. No, I just wanted that clarified, because 25 metres is quite deep, and it's okay when you come down the initial ramp into the site. Yeah, that's quite a nice gradient, but the problem is it's where the siting of these properties will be. Now, I take it they're going to want to use the whole site to actually space out these properties. So whatever gets built within the furthest corners or close to is still going to be 25 metres down to the base of this pit. They're not raising the pit. And bearing in mind, that's the southern side, which actually where the sun comes from, that then really will be a place where they will have a lot of shade, especially through like the winter months. But it was just to clarify the depth of that pit, because I think it makes a lot of difference from street level. 25 metres is quite a lot, and it's much less steep, as I say, on the gradient walkway into the actual pit. But from within the pit, when you look all around, it is fairly steep-sided. So it does give me concerns, and I am with Mr. Taylor on this, to think, you know, this is to live all year round, and it is also to think, you know, we've got to think of the people, of the environment, and and what they may have to put up with in the future if this goes ahead. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And just to clarify, we're doing outline at the moment. We don't know what the plans are going to be. They could all be on one side of the chalk pit area, which means that they'll get sunlight all day long. My biggest thing that I saw down there was the size of the opening that they had. You know, it's a much larger area than I remember. I've just been reminded by Emily that I didn't clarify that we haven't got any public speakers for this. So just to clarify, there are no public speakers for this particular item. I've got Councillor Vaughan next. Councillor Vaughan, you're on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, Councillor Vaughan, Langley Ward. If you come over to Langley, we gave a tiny little piece of land to a developer for 16 homes. This piece of land must be about 4 or 5 times the size of that. And I think when I got there and walked down there, and I thought, oh my God, look at this. What a beautiful site it is to put homes on. You have all the trees. Admittedly, some of those will need to go, but then that's only because they're being clogged up with ivy and are dying. So, and with all the landscaping that's put in, that will then cover that. But I think it's an absolute beautiful place to actually live. And if I could buy one of those houses, I'd be there. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mia.
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't going to say much, but I do know the area, although I have to apologise, I couldn't be with you on Saturday, but I know the area quite well because I usually go and pick up and drop people in that nursery, Coppice Court. But I do have interest, and I have looked at it. Actually, I looked at it yesterday, and it was a nice day, and I have looked at it. The depth we are talking about, I wouldn't call it pit because I don't know what this pit is about. However, but it is a lowland. I would like to compare this site compared to the site which is Upland Road, opposite Upland Road. What's that little road called towards Seaford if you go Easton Road? That on the right, that's quite low down. I don't know if it's 25 meters, but it's going to be quite low. I wonder if anyone can name that street. There's a little street goes right down. If you keep going up Easton Road just before you go into left, which is Upland Road, it's on the right, that down bit there. The house's roof is lower than the road. So looking at that downland, I'm not really surprised that we can build there. I think it's a nice place to build houses, and I echo with Councillor Maxted really, that I feel it should be okay for outline, because we don't know what it's going to be applied for. If it's houses, obviously, I don't think it's going to be that bad. And if it's not houses and industrial, anybody is willing to come for, I don't know what's going to happen. But I quite would like to live there, to be honest with you, like Councillor Vaughan has said. I wouldn't mind living like that area. People are living even in worse areas than that. So I would really rather, I would support the outline plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mayor. We'll hold that thought just for a moment and go to Councillor Diplock.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Mayor, I think it's Ridgelands Close that you're referring to, just off Eastdean Road. And I think that's a really good example, Councillor Mayor, where it is lower than the main road that surrounds it. But Ridgelands Close is again, it's a smaller site than the Auckland's chalk bit we're considering tonight. And yet Ridgelands Close has done very nicely. They're very desirable houses, and it's done very nice. I always find it interesting. We've all seen exactly the same chalk bit, but there's a real diversity of opinion on what it's like. And I know we have the same thing when we're considering perhaps the style and appearance of some buildings, where chalk and cheese, you know, you do like some things and others really don't like that thing, even though they're looking at exactly the same thing. For me, I think the site is sufficiently big enough and open enough. I know there are the sloping sides, but the site is open and big enough. And again, we're simply considering the outline permission here. So I think this is a good site for siting residential on, and that's it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Yes, I don't think I need to remind everybody, but we live on the edge of the downs. You know, half of the town's built on a slope, so we have this sort of problem sort of occurring all over the place. We've all had a chance to speak. I've got Councillor Taylor. If I give you a closing remark, and then we're going to go to a vote. I think, Councillor Taylor.
It was only, Mr. Chairman, that I'd like a recorded vote, because I think we'll see as this develops into accommodation what people really think of it. And I know that 2 Liberal Democrat councillors on this planning committee would love to live there. So a name vote, please, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, not a problem. Councillor Meir, you're one of those councillors who'd like to live there. Would you like to propose? You're still on mute. I need you to say the words, Councillor Meir. Sorry. Okay, I'm going to leave Councillor Meir. He has said that he would. Councillor Maxted. Can you?
I'll propose it, Chair.
You'll propose. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Diplock. Just say the words, please.
Yeah, I will happily second, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have a proposer and a seconder for approval of this outline planning permission. Emily, if we could take a named vote, please. As I call your name out, please say either that you're for, against, or abstain, please. And can I also ask you to mention whether or not you have lost connection whilst you were in this meeting? So for, against, abstain, did you lose connection at all? Councillor Diplock.
For, and I did not lose connection.
Thank you. Councillor Maxted.
For, and I didn't lose connection.
Thank you. Councillor Metcalfe.
Against, and I did not lose connection.
Thank you. Councillor Mia?
Sorry, Chairman, I couldn't really get my thing to open the speaker because it wouldn't work then, but I did hear everything. That was fine.
Okay.
Thank you very much for your help, and I'm for, sir. Thank you very much.
And did you lose connection at all?
No, I didn't lose the connection, but I was trying to put the speaker on. It wouldn't work then. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Murdoch?
Against, and I didn't lose connection.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor?
Against, and I did not lose any connection.
Thank you. Councillor Vaughan?
For, and I didn't lose connection.
Thank you. And I, Councillor Jim Murray, will be voting for, and I also did not lose any connection. So application number 200855, outline planning permission with all matters reserved for siting of 18 residential units. Planning permission has been granted. When relevant with additional conditions, planning permission planning permission has been granted. So thank you all very much. We now move on to the agenda item number 7, the planning enforcement policy. We do have a speaker on this one. So if I can ask Mr. Palmer to read out that speech for us, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I will read out the speech. Before that, a very quick canter through the papers that you've got before you this evening. I'm Lee Palmer, Head of Planning First, presenting this item. The item that members have before them is an enforcement policy, a planning enforcement policy. The document outlines how we apply our judgment in the processing of the enforcement complaints that we received. It outlines that we have a priority approach, 1, 2 and 3, most severe through to the ones that are less severe. It outlines the fact that we negotiate solutions for the majority of the cases that we have in hand. We seek retrospective applications where we deem them to be appropriate, and ultimately we end up with serving enforcement notices. The policy outlines and informs members that enforcement action is always discretionary and also proportionate. So members should be mindful of that when we talk around enforcement issues. Goes on to mention the importance of keeping all parties updated. That is the complainant as well as the perpetrator in terms of the life and judgment that we bring to bear on those breaches of planning control. And the policy document concludes with a range of policies that do outline how we assess our thinking on those breaches. Chairman, with your indulgence, I will move on to the speech that we've received. It is from Mr. Scard, Chair of Meads Community Association. Thank you. The Meads Community Association broadly welcomes the introduction of this policy. We suspect it has come about as a result of dissatisfaction from the MCA and residents in property surrounding Wood Winton, who have complained quite vociferously about the lack of supervision of a number of conditions imposed by the Planning Committee on this contentious development. We remind committee that when planning consent was given in June last year for 6 homes, the committee insisted that EBC planners monitor the development on a regular basis. Neighbours' complaints about site safety and breaches of conditions attached to the development were reported to planning officers, but often these concerns were not responded to adequately or within reasonable timescale. Meanwhile, the development was proceeding at a fast pace. As a result, a formal complaint was made under the council's complaint procedure, following which there has been a flurry of activity with recognition by officers that reported breaches could have been dealt with in a more timely fashion, and acceptance that some of the conditions imposed before the development have not been observed. If new enforcement policy had been in place, these difficulties could have been avoided. At an early stage of building, it was noticed that additional windows and doors were being added into houses 2 through 5, which were not on the original plans. This was notified to EBC Planning, and then invited the developer to submit a retrospective application, which they did some weeks after, and most of the doors and windows were in place. We do have concerns in paragraph 5.1 of the covering report that when the breach of consent is established, then the remedy as set out in the second bullet point is to invite a retrospective application for planning permission. Invite is a soft word. We would suggest that is replaced by inform the developer that there has been a planning breach and that retrospective planning consent is required, which does not imply that consent will be granted and the development regularised. We contend that inviting retrospective applications after the event, that this gives the green light to developers who, having been granted consent on the original plans, can then get away with changes after they have been made through retrospective applications. The MCA believes that if developers do need to make amendments to the original plans, then the council's policy should be for the developer to obtain planning in advance of these changes being made. The MCA welcomes the new complaints procedure as set out in paragraphs 3 through 6, which is all about following up complaints and explaining actions with a clear timescale. We look forward to the adoption of this policy, hopefully with our suggested amendment, plus a commitment from officers that there will be sufficient resources to implement and sustain the policy, and it is not simply a tick box exercise. Thank you, Chairman. That concludes the speech on behalf of the Meads Community Association. Thank you.
Thank you. So this planning enforcement policy is going to be a really useful document for us in the same way that local plan is for us when we're sort of looking at our local local area and how we imply and comply with the planning law. The planning enforcement policy will give us a little bit more weight now when we can go to anybody who's breaking the rules, looking for retrospective planning permission when they should have come to us in the first place. It's going to make things easier for us to sort of enforce going through those guidelines. So we've been working with this for a number of years now, and I really welcome the fact that it's now up and running. So I, for one, am very, very pleased. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do understand where the Meads Community Association are coming from, because I think they feel that people should get planning permission before they carry out the work. But that's, I know, a good reason for concerns about that. But my real concerns are at 6.4, where we've got the 3 levels, 1, 2 and 3. Now, one of the biggest problems, and we should be grateful to the public for informing either the planning department or their local council if they wish, if anything is being carried out within their particular area and they feel without proper authority. And where it says level 1, which is the highest level, now it still has to be within 1 working day. Well, I've had occasions when somebody's about to take down a big Victorian chimney stack, and if you're not careful, they'll start it on a Friday, and it'll be down by Monday before any officer can be alerted to come out. I remember the day when Keith Pullen, who was an enforcement officer, you would ring him and he would be at the site within an hour very often and put a stop notice, and I don't see where that is coming in. We don't seem to have this. If something's happened really quickly, trees being felled, they can come down in half a day, and yet it might have a tree preservation order on it. And it doesn't seem, to me, the policy doesn't seem to be snappy enough, and we should have a means of a lot quicker than just 1 working day. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I think that's the main point there, is the fact that it's within 1 working day. it would be a bit unfair for us to put in there within 1 working hour, because that just wouldn't be realistically to be able to do. But Mr. Palmer, would you like to come back and respond to that at all?
Thank you, Chair. Just to echo the point you made, yes, the ambition is that within 1 working day, we will action those highly vulnerable breaches. So as Councillor Taylor quite rightly says, TPO trees with a chainsaw going, listed buildings having work done to them without consent, that's when we have to be out there very quickly. And members will appreciate this is where the value of neighbourhood first come in, that the boots on the ground are plenty. So we will call on their assistance in this sort of scenario. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Diplock.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to thank Mr. Scard and the MCA for their comments as well. One thing that I've kind of not noticed in here, which I'd like perhaps amended slightly, is just about how we keep ward councillors informed. Because I'm sure there's very often a case where a resident will approach planning officers and perhaps the ward councillor is one of the last people to know in some circumstances. So I wonder if we can amend the policy. I'm not exactly sure where, but somewhere around 6.2, an amendment in there just to say that once a formal complaint has been made, perhaps an automatic email to the ward councillors when a response is sent to the complainant, just to make sure ward councillors are informed on that basis. Thank you.
Chairman, through you, we could insert that suggested change, not a problem.
Lovely, thank you. Do we have any other comments? I would also like to thank Mr. Scard. He's been a good adversary to the planning committee over the years, him and the Meads group. So thank you very much for his contribution this evening. Next meeting. So if there's no other comments, the next meeting is scheduled for the 20th of April. And this agenda is completed. Thank you all for attending, and I close the meeting at 6:47. Mr. Palmer, if you could just remind the members of what time we've got this training on